welcome. The CEO of a big corporation once decided he needed to get out of the office and do one of his favorite things, which was to go duck hunting. So he went way out into nature and was hunting ducks. And he ended up bringing down a duck that landed on a farmer's field. And as he was about to go over the fence to retrieve his duck, this old farmer came racing over on his tractor. And the old farmer said, "Hey, I see what happened here. That duck is mine. It's on my property." The CEO said, "Look, you don't want to contend with me. I am one of the smartest people on the planet. If you want to take this to court, I'm going to end up owning your farm, so you should just let it be." The farmer looked at him, kind of smiled, and he said, "You don't really understand how things work around here. I was just going to propose we do the 3-kick rule." And the CEO was taken aback and said, "What's the 3-kick rule?" And the farmer said, "Well, I kick you 3 times, you kick me 3 times. We go back and forth until someone gives up." So the CEO looked at this guy. This old farmer couldn't have weighed more than 140 pounds, and he was a big guy. And he said, "Okay, let's go for it." So this little farmer was wearing his farm boots, and the first kick, you can imagine where that one landed. The guy doubled over. The next kick, was to his knee, fell down to the ground, kicked him again. The CEO was really, really hurting. And he thought, okay, now it's my turn. And he manages to get himself back up to standing, and he goes, "Okay, buddy, it's my turn." And the old farmer looks at him and says, "You can have the duck." Why did I share that story? Well, it's one of my favorite stories, but it actually ties into the talk I'd like to launch into around wisdom. And essentially, what this talk illustrates is that smart does not equal wise. I'd like to talk a little bit about what's referred to as prajna, which is wisdom or insight. And this is seeing insights into the nature of reality. It has to do with discriminating knowledge, with intuitive apprehension of what is actually true. It's a very, very powerful force in our lives and something we really, truly want to cultivate. What I'd like to talk about, again, in 4 parts, as I usually do. Part 1 is how wisdom is one of the most precious qualities you can cultivate. The second is how important it is to look at what gets in the way of wisdom. And as wisdom and insight are really tied to meditation, the third part I'd like to talk about is the anatomy of an insight. What goes into an insight arising in your life or in your practice? And fourth, I'd like to talk about how wisdom is not just seeing clearly, it's about the balance of how you hold it. So, wisdom. A number of years ago, actually quite a while ago, I met this fellow who was probably in his early 80s, out in New Mexico, was with a good friend. His name was Eric Kassir. And he was a friend of my friend's family, so we went out to his place, and he designed and built these amazing buildings on this property that he had outside of Santa Fe. And he was a very, very interesting guy. He really had quite a mystical quality about him, and he sounded just like Henry Kissinger. He was originally from Germany, and so he could have talked like that. And his story was amazing. Just briefly, he grew up in Germany, World War II. He was, I think he was 16 or 17 when he was in school, when Hitler was in power. His uncle, Ernst Cassirer, was one of the great philosophers of that time, and Einstein would come and play chess with his uncle at the house. Very, very cultured family. And he wrote a school paper that was against the regime, against Hitler. And he was told by his schoolmaster, it would be a really good idea for you to get out of the country because having written this paper, if it gets seen, you will be tracked down. So he left. He left Germany. He emigrated to Canada, and he picked up a job as a plumber. So he worked as a plumber, and over the years, he became head of the plumbers union in Canada. After a while, he decided that he wanted to do something different, and he moved to California, and he created one of the largest used car dealerships in the state of California. After a while, he thought he wanted to kind of get into building and construction. That really interested him. And so he created a construction company that did major buildings. And then he went to Esalen, and he got turned on to energy and healing. And then he devoted the rest of his life to teaching about how energy works. And he was a very, very accomplished guy. I remember he was talking about the aura, and we were just kind of hanging out with him. At that time, I was studying a lot of hands-on healing techniques. And he said, well, you can just open up the aura, and then you could feel the room getting warm, or you can close down the aura, and then you'd feel the room getting cold. It was really wild. Now, I'm sharing this about him because he was one of the most interesting people I'd met. And when you think about the interesting people in your life, like the people who really, really have wisdom, what I find very interesting is quite often the most interesting people have gone through multiple incarnations in one lifetime. And awesome about all of this is that they have a different relationship to suffering. With all the change that he went through in his life, he grew through that change. He never shut down around suffering. He kept learning and growing. And I think that wisdom is really the capacity to see what's true. It's about seeing reality. It's seeing how everything changes. It's seeing that your relationship to what is changing determines how much you'll suffer. It's seeing it in the nature of the self. But it's also about how you hold your experience, how you respond to the events in your life. And I think that's what the journey's all about, really. Seeing deeply into the nature of reality and learning how to cultivate your capacity to respond with a wise heart, to respond with empathy and kindness. And I think all of us who are interested in waking up to reality are drawn to this awakening of heart and mind. Something has called each of us to look closer at life and to kind of step on this journey of awakening. So this talk is part of a series on the 10 perfections. These are 10 qualities that you can cultivate. I like to think them as like facets of a gem that you can polish. I've talked about generosity, cultivating this quality of generosity that can sort of break down the barrier between you and others. We've explored cultivating virtue and moral behavior to make sure that your behavior is really aligned with what you most want. We've talked about renunciation, about letting go of what's not serving you and your purpose. And talking now about cultivating wisdom and insight. And it's interesting how wisdom follows the kind of the letting go. When you reduce distractions, you start to see more clearly. The classic analogy of taking a glass of muddy water and setting it on a countertop, and over time, the mud settles and the water becomes clear. It's kind of that process of either consciously removing that which doesn't serve you, or going through this process of allowing the allowing the mind to clear through settling. And so if you really want to wake up, you notice how you're not awake. If you want to be really, really present and you really make that your priority, you will begin to notice all the ways you're not present. If you really want to purify your heart, you pay attention to that, you're going to notice all the ways that you're mean and petty and self-serving. In that same way, when you're cultivating wisdom, you can begin to notice what's not wise. I grew up on a farm in southeastern Pennsylvania, and I'm really aware I'm getting older. And a lot of people don't realize that people of my age, we grew up with black and white TVs. And where I grew up, we got 2.5 channels. We got ABC and NBC, and on a magical day, we would get CBS, but usually not. So we were kind of stuck watching two channels. And I remember watching the sitcoms as a kid. And it became pretty clear to me that each sitcom was based on some lie or some misunderstanding or some cover-up. And then magically, 24 minutes later, the truth comes out, and then the story's over. And I remember like being 7 or 8 years old. I was a pretty simple kid with not a lot of stimulation, but I remember watching these sitcoms and just going, why don't they just tell the truth? Why don't they just tell the truth in the beginning? We could avoid this whole crazy story. You know, when you think of someone who's not wise, it's an interesting question. What qualities do they exhibit? Someone who's not wise. And chances are, you may notice how they may be beset by one or all three of the 3 major afflictions of the mind. How their mind, their personality is hijacked by greed, by desire, by wanting. And the second affliction is the affliction of hatred, of anger, judgment, ill will. And the third of delusion or confusion. Recognizing these 3 afflictions, or in some traditions they're referred to as the 3 poisons, can be really helpful because you can begin to recognize how these energies tend to come in and run the show. They take over. And you may be aware of that kind of classic teaching story of how they would, and I don't know where the culture was, but how they would trap monkeys, where they would take a small shell and drill a hole in it and put a peanut in there, and that shell would be tied to a string, and the monkey would come to reach in and grab the peanut, but the hole was smaller than its fist, and it wasn't able to let go of the peanut because it really, really wanted the peanut. That pretty much describes our condition. We override wisdom with that instinct for wanting. How many times have you really, really wanted something, knowing kind of in your heart of hearts that it really wasn't that good for you? Hatred, the whole energy of anger, aversion. How many people have acted out of spite, despite their inner knowing? When I think of those that I have not forgiven in my life, and how much energy I have kind of burned up by simply cycling through the stories of how I've been wronged. Just a tremendous waste of time and energy. The more we find ourselves indulging into hatred, as the story goes, it's like drinking poison, hoping the other person dies. Delusion or confusion, which is not seeing clearly. It's about believing something is true when it's not, or believing something isn't true when it is. And in these days of conspiracy theories and QAnon, it's nothing new. There have been stories, rumors spread forever and ever. So against these energies of greed and hatred and delusion, these powerful forces, if you want to wake up, you're swimming upstream. You're swimming against your own conditioning. You're swimming against the entire conditioning of the culture. This is a metaphor that the Buddha used 2,500 years ago that's so true today. When you think of the early scientists who were confined to prison for stating that the earth is not the center of the universe, the shared delusion we live in is staggering. The belief that we're not going to die. So seeing clearly takes a lot of work. Takes a lot of work. How do we begin to see more clearly into the nature of reality? Or as a good friend of mine says, his definition of vipassana or insight meditation is cultivating penetrating insights into the nature of reality. How do we do that? Now, I find it interesting in meditation, and again, this practice of insight meditation is about learning to see what's true. And it's very, very helpful to have a daily practice, and it can be quite extraordinary if you ever have the opportunity to do a longer retreat, to do a retreat where you can really be immersed. There's just nothing like being in a situation where you are around other people who are practicing, and the entire retreat is designed to minimize distractions. You're not speaking. You're refraining from reading from your device. You are just freely accepting what is given in terms of the food. And you're spending hours and hours and hours of sitting meditation, walking meditation, mindful eating, mindful rest. And this muddy water of the mind can begin to settle. And sometimes you'll get an insight. You'll realize something. And so I remember once I was on a long retreat, and as is the wont of my mind, I was mulling over relationships that didn't feel complete. Where, again, in some way, I was wronged. It's been said that we spend most of our time in relationships either dominating or trying to avoid domination. And when I moved into the spiritual community, there were kind of like levels of seniority, and seniority for some reason carried a lot of weight in this community. It probably does in every community, but again, seniority doesn't necessarily equal wisdom. And so, having people with more power and seniority over me and really triggered me, because I really wanted approval. And one person in particular, one of my coordinators. And because I wanted this person's approval, I volunteered to do extra work. And so I worked really, really hard. And I never really got what I wanted. I never really got the attention, the affection, the acknowledgement that I wanted. And I always kind of held that as a knot. And so one of the ways we can begin to investigate reality and cultivate wisdom, the analogy which you may be well familiar with, is taking time to do the U-turn, where you really look at from the event to how it lives on the inside. And this analogy of rain, of recognizing, sensing if you can allow or accept, actively investigating the phenomena that's there, and then exploring what it means to nourish what you find with some form of loving presence. And so here I was, just sitting and noticing this kind of this knot, this clench inside, just not getting what I wanted out of life, out of these people who had more power than me. I've been running this story for many, many, many years. And what's so powerful about this practice of investigation is the opportunity to move from the story to how it lives on the inside, to move from the biography into the biology. And so when I explored this knot, this tightness inside, this kind of clench in my heart, I made room for it. I recognized it. I named it. It was okay for me to kind of allow it, and I could just sat with this feeling. A lot of times, we're kind of designed to figure out what's wrong and then nuke it. But part of this practice is about really slowing down and being with. So I just imagine this knot kind of at my heart, my solar plexus. I just sort of imagined that I was sitting on a park bench with it. Okay, I'm just going to hang out. I'm not going to try to figure you out. Let's just get more familiar with each other. And so I sat with it for some period of time, just with the intention to get more familiar with it. And then suddenly I had this memory arose of someone I got intimately involved with in college, I think in my freshman year. Someone I was attracted to, someone I seduced, and then someone I lost interest in. And I remember that I just moved on. I never acknowledged or really thanked that person. They were a really kind person, and I just moved on. I remember someone sharing with me years later how much that person was hurt, and I never took the time to follow up. And I began to feel just the ache of sadness for my lack of sensitivity. And I began to really just imagine what it felt like for her to not be acknowledged. And in that shift of just noticing it and then sensing if I could bring some form of empathy or kindness or compassion to that, this whole knot began to really deeply, deeply spread. And with that was just a sense of deep appreciation for how hurt we all are, how much we're all wanting attention, affection, and love. And with that was a really kind of a sweet sadness. I never would have gotten to that insight or to that shift in my awareness without really bringing a curiosity, without the capacity to name it, to make room for it, to have tea with it. And I think that quite often what cultivates a shift in identity or an insight can arise quite often in conflict. And if you think of someone now that you're just kind of holding a little bit separate from yourself, maybe there's some disappointment or some wanting. If you can just imagine that. And take a moment to imagine what it's like for you. What triggered that sense of separation? Just take a moment and sense, what was the event that created that feeling of other? And then you might just take a moment and sense, well, what do you feel? Can you find a few emotional words that describe how that lives on the inside? You might sense it in the felt sense of the body, but also, are there any emotional words? And is there a sense of what you were wanting or what you were needing? I know we're going through this pretty quickly, but if you can, Imagine you could pop yourself over into the other person's point of view. How would they describe what happened? What do you imagine they feel? What do you imagine that might feel like inside for them? Or any emotional words? Again, you're just imagining here. And can you imagine what they were wanting, what they were hoping for? This capacity to sense another's point of view, to role reverse, I think is one of the doorways to insight, one of the doorways into wisdom. The capacity to shift from a tightly bound, tightly wound point of view to extend consciousness to another and to sense what they feel, what they need. This whole concept of reframing, kind of opening the frame of your perspective, are some of the ways that can help to cultivate this shift in consciousness. If you think of, in fact, let's just take a moment if you like. If you like, you can close your eyes and just take a deep breath. Relax on the exhalation. And if you would, think of someone you think of as wise. And you might take a moment to sense if you can create an image in your mind. Reflect perhaps on their tone of voice or their words. And just take a moment to reflect, what quality does this person exhibit? What is it that makes them wise? If you like, you can deepen your breath. If you like, you can open your eyes. Chances are that you may have sensed some qualities of wisdom here, that this person is not necessarily attached to a point of view. They may have the capacity to be open and take in new information. They may have some access around loving presence or compassion or empathy. This capacity to shift one's point of view can be so helpful. To imagine another person's point of view. A good friend of mine who's a therapist had an image of Earth from outer space directly across from her client's chair. And from time to time, when it felt timely for her, she would say, when you look at that image and you reflect on this situation we're exploring, what's that like? This capacity for self-observation and for investigation can be so, so powerful. When you realize that your issues are indeed in your tissues, when you take the time to recognize, to allow, to investigate, to bring call on loving presence, can cultivate a shift. It's enormously powerful when you can explore your thoughts and your beliefs as well. Not to take the time now, but certainly have talked in the past, and to explore the beliefs, which are really kind of the operating system that you are using to navigate life. If you can, when you find yourself caught, identify the fundamental core belief, and then to really inquire if it's true. to sense who you are without that belief, sometimes can be shattering. If you're not familiar with the work of Byron Katie, just tremendous, beautiful, beautiful work there. So this all points toward the magic of insight, of being able to see more clearly into the nature of reality itself. We spend most of our time at odds with reality. And ultimately, if we argue with reality, we're going to lose. And this is really where just the power of mindfulness itself is so powerful. We can think of, I like to think of it often as training yourself to notice what's happening as it's happening. As I breathe in, I'm aware of breathing in. As I breathe out, I'm aware of breathing out. But then expanding beyond that is the incredible capacity, kind of miracle of being able to recognize the filter through which you are perceiving. Are you perceiving life through the filter of greed, of wanting and desire? Are you perceiving life through the filter of hatred or ill will or aversion? Or are you perceiving life through the filter of delusion or confusion? Just that alone can be extraordinary. When I can recognize, oh, my experience is completely filtered through aversion right now. I'm looking for the wrong. I'm looking through a negativity bias. Or I'm looking through a really deep desire of wanting. Or I'm aware I'm not seeing clearly. Just noticing that can be quite profound. And so this is all about aligning ourselves with reality, the desire to, as I like to say, practice wholehearted, enthusiastic cooperation with reality. And so I've been reading this biography of Ram Dass. And I'm so grateful to Ram Dass. I read his book, Grist for the Mill, when I was in grad school. And by the time I got to the last page on that book, I knew my life was going to be different. And it indeed was. I was not going to live a traditional life. I rededicated myself to meditation, and my life went a very, very different way. And I remember in one of his books, he talked about imagine a lifetime where you could be the witness. Imagine a lifetime where you got no positive feedback, but what you got to do is just simply watch the world go by and purify this quality of preferenceless awareness. And he said, if you look closely, that some people in the world who are in extreme poverty, like street beggars, he's talking specifically about street beggars in India, that you can see that there's an incredible quality of wisdom that they have. And he said some very, very, so this is his perspective. So there's some very, very high beings who are beggars in the street. I happened to be reading that when I was living in Niamey, the capital city of Niger in the Peace Corps. And I was in the marketplace, going out doing my shopping. And the marketplace, really rough and tumble. You know, people jostling and you're bargaining for everything. It's a real workout. And so I was kind of in a crowd, and I felt this kind of tug at my sleeve. And I turned around, and there was an older man, at least he seemed older to me, who had leprosy and no fingers. And he had a little bucket kind of hooked over the palm of his hand. And he held his fingers up right to my face. And he said, cadeau, a gift. I was so I was so shocked and revolted. I just said no, and um, I took a step back. And I'm not making this up, but somehow, even in the midst of my revulsion, there was a kindness in his eyes. And he said, "Merci, thank you." I kind of moved on through my day, and I kept coming back to the look in his eyes. That even at the revulsion that I had for him, which was very, very clear on my face and in my body language, this look of kindness and compassion. I went back every day for weeks trying to find him because there was something about his presence that so touched my heart. You know, when we attune ourselves to suffering, this is where the wise heart comes into play, because finding the relationship to suffering is really important. I trained for many, many years as a body worker, as kind of a hands-on healer. I was super passionate about it. I got certified in a whole bunch of modalities. But when I first started out, I thought that what I had to do was really feel what the person on the table was feeling. I really had to feel their suffering in order to really relieve it. And I realized I was exhausted, utterly exhausted. And then I trained in something called zero balancing, where we got very, very trained to, like, when you make contact with someone, the practice was don't try to stream energy. Don't try to pull energy from the other person. Don't try to push energy into the other person, but just make the connection and just be aware of the interface. And just hold that interface and then listen how the other person's body or their energy responds. And it became this extraordinary way of working with people. That all I need to do is make contact, hold presence, and then your body will begin to respond. Your innate energetic wisdom will begin to move and shift and change. And the bottom line around this balance of wisdom and compassion is that you cannot learn another person's lessons for them. The classic story is someone who saw a butterfly breaking out of its cocoon, and he thought, oh, well, let me help. And he kind of helped peel the cocoon back to make it easier for the butterfly. And because he did that, the butterfly's wing didn't fully develop, and the butterfly died. And he realized that by stepping in, he was trying to help. But what he took away was a very important part of the butterfly becoming fully developed. We can offer our support, we can offer our compassion, we can offer our kindness to others. But everyone has to do their work. And this is part of the nature of seeing it in the nature of karma. When there's a hard winter, there are fewer rabbits in the spring. That when you are suffering and you remember that other people feel this too, this is part of opening to the nature of reality. And I think perhaps when it comes to cultivating wisdom, it really comes down to seeing the filter through which you're perceiving. It has to do with the desire to see clearly, to know what's true. And it has something to do with cultivating an inner state where wisdom can arise. One of my teachers said something when I heard this, I thought, man, I am so taking that with me. It's a very charismatic teacher who said, people aren't drawn to me for what I know. They're drawn to me for how comfortable I am with what I don't know. And I think perhaps opening to wisdom is that comfort with what we don't know, the willingness to be informed by the present moment, and ultimately our capacity to really love the mystery, to trust the unfolding of life, and to be deeply, deeply attentive to not just what's happening as it's happening, but to be aware of this filter of perception and to open ourselves deeply and intimately to the mystery of this amazing life we're living. Let's close with a short meditation. If you like, you might close your eyes and take 3 slow and smooth breaths. And you might bring into mind someone who's going through a hard time in your life right now. Someone who's really challenged or unhappy. And you might just sense, as you take a few moments to draw this person closer, you might find visualizing them, imagining their voice. Notice the inner response to their suffering. What does it feel like inside as you reflect on them right now? And can you just allow yourself to kind of sense the nature of their suffering, their challenges right now? And can you imagine in your own way this exquisite balance of wisdom and compassion? To hold this person gently in your heart, to allow the compassionate heart to respond, and at the same time to understand the unfolding of wisdom in this person. And you might, in your own way, just offer your well-wishing. May you feel safe from inner and outer harm. May you feel an ease of well-being. May insight and wisdom open you to new levels of understanding and compassion. And you might inquire, is there a sense of what this person might need from you that would truly serve the awakening of their heart and mind? As you're ready, you can deepen your breath. As you're ready, you can open your eyes. This awakening of wisdom and insight requires such a delicate dance. And I think what really can fuel this unfolding is sincerity, a sincere and authentic desire to really know what is true and to wake up as best we can to reality itself and to love the mystery. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope this talk was helpful. May you and your wise heart have a wonderful, wonderful time from here on. I look forward to being with you again. Thanks so much.